When it comes to the law, Apple's been having a bit of a rough time lately. From the epic lawsuits to the chaos in the EU around the fair market stuff, things are a bit chaotic. I have a few videos covering this already, but today's news is crazy. Epic is no longer alone in fighting this battle, and neither is the EU. It seems like a bunch of important companies are now ready to not just support Epic, but join the battle themselves, because it's not just Epic being affected. I've been saying this for a while, but the articles are coming out because the support started today officially. We're now seeing Microsoft and Meta doing public accusations of Apple playing games with its App Store rules. And this is very important because, again, the App Store rules both enforce monopolistic practices where Apple can choose not just which companies can publish which software, but which industries and market trends can exist in the first place. Apple can decide no one else can use credit cards for processing on their platform unless they want to do physical goods transport. Like Amazon can use their own credit card processing for buying goods, but when you're buying a digital service like an ebook or you're renting a movie, that has to go through Apple Pay. Apple's made concessions with Amazon in order to keep them from starting shit, but not every company got those same concessions. And it's incredibly unfair to smaller businesses and businesses that are outside of Apple's interests, which even though Epic Games has partnered with Apple for the better part of 2 decades now, they still treated Epic like shit, banned them from the App Store, banned Fortnite forever, and now it's a chaotic legal case. And today it got a little more chaotic, and I want to dig in. In an amicus brief in Epic versus Apple, the app developers say Apple's compliance plans would not introduce more price competition for app payments. This is important because the issue that I'm referring to here specifically is the opportunity to process payments in a way other than Apple's. Because if you're using Apple Pay in your app, they take 30%, no exceptions. Kind of, there are exceptions for physical stuff, but it's getting in the weeds, doesn't matter that much. What we're talking about here is digital purchases being required to use Apple Pay and required to pay Apple's 30% chaotic fee. Apple is not living up to the letter or spirit of an order issued by California federal judges in his trial against Epic Games. Again, you should definitely check out my video on this if you haven't. The TLDR of what's being described here is that the California federal judge specifically ruled that Apple has to allow for external links to other payment options to be included in apps. And Apple's been vicious about this rule. In particular, they still think they can charge a percentage after you've been linked off platform. So if Spotify had a thing that said, hey, you can click this link and go pay externally instead of using the phone so they can skip the 30%, they're expected to pay a percentage to Apple still for doing that link off platform, which is outside of the craziness that is the bookkeeping for that is just insanity. Ugh. That's what Meta, Microsoft, Match Group, and X told the court in an amicus brief on Wednesday. Yep, that checks out. Match Group is the company that makes all the dating apps like Tinder, Hinge, OkCupid, most of them. And they're, I'm sure, fucked. Imagine, because like all of their income comes from in-app purchases. Imagine just a 30% bump to your company's income. That's a crazy thought. And all that money goes to Apple right now. Nonsense. And obviously, Elon's not happy about this as well. For platforms that have subscriptions to creators, for example, is actually even worse. We worked on this at Twitch because when you subscribe to me on Twitch, the $5 a month gets split between Twitch and me. Previously, it was a 50-50 split. Now that I'm part of the Partner Plus program, it's a 70-30 split where I get 70% of that money. But if you were to buy on an iPhone instead, and they were to still charge that same $5, 30% goes to Apple, which means that Twitch and I are now splitting what's left, which is crazy to think that Apple gets the same cut that Twitch does when somebody chooses to support me. And now they're getting 30 out of what's left. Twitch gets 30. I'm getting an effective like 50 or less % out of that, which is insane. And it makes creating platforms for creator support where the platform itself is just taking a small percentage on top. Like in the case of Twitter, if you subscribe to me on Twitter, they actually just want to give me 100% and then in the future take 90% for me and 10% for themselves. But if there's a mandatory 30% on top that Apple gets, insane. Actually insane. Yeah. So obviously, even though I'm an Apple fanboy, I'm probably going to be in favor of this. So we'll see where this goes. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers told Apple in 2021 that it could not prevent app developers from using buttons, external links, or other calls to action, informing users of payment options outside of their apps. This ruling is particularly important because, as I cited in my other video, their reading of buttons, external links, or other calls to action, Apple read this as they only have to allow one, not that they're not allowed to block them, but that the word "or" here specifically means they only have to support one of these options, which is an incredibly bad faith reading of this ruling that Apple is choosing to do because it benefits them. They chose they'll only allow for an external link. They'll only allow one per app in one place that has to be different from the place where you actually do payments, and they take a fee on top. Actual insanity. And they got away with that because of the word "or" here. So it does not surprise me that this ruling is being challenged because this ruling is kind of bullshit. Epic and other developers have taken issue with Apple's 15 to 30% fees on in-app purchases, which Apple makes difficult to avoid by also preventing them from directing users to payment options at a lower price outside of the iOS ecosystem. Apple has defended the fees as a reasonable compensation for its own services on the App Store. No, there's a lot of reasons why that this is not the case. This is a quote directly from Judge Rogers, the judge who ruled over this case. A disproportionate amount of money is coming from the gaming industry relative to the IP Apple is giving them and everyone else. In a sense, it's almost as if they're subsidizing everyone else. The specific point they made was in reference to things like a banking company. Bank of America probably makes a lot more money than a random indie game dev. Bank of America probably benefits a lot more from being on the App Store than a random indie game dev. Bank of America only pays $100 per developer that is using the App Store tools per year. So if they have, let's say, 10 developers working on the App Store app, that's $1,000 at most per year. It might even be less if they're sharing a developer account. So a big company like Bank of America is paying their App Store fees and nothing else because everything you do in the app isn't something that Apple can take their 30% from. That doesn't mean it takes less effort for Apple to distribute this app, for Apple to review this app, and for Apple to do all of the things they have to do with an app. In fact, Bank of America probably costs Apple significantly more money than almost any game on the App Store. Because of that, the game's paying a 30% fee when Bank of America pays $100 a year means that Bank of America's development on the App Store is being subsidized by random indie game devs. If that doesn't feel like shit to you, I don't know how to get through to you because that is an actual insane fact. That Apple claims that they're doing this for fairness of costs on their end, but the ones who cost them the most money pay them nothing, and the ones who cost them the least money pay 30% of their income. That is actually insane. And honestly, shout out to Judge Rogers for recognizing that. There aren't many judges that would have caught on to the insanity there. Of the companies that filed the brief on Wednesday, all of which say they've been subjected to Apple's rulings against steering users away from their own payment processing, have said that Apple's idea of compliance would not fix the problem. Its proposal to let developers point to an external purchase link is complex and burdensome, to say the least. So just to give you an idea of how absurd Apple's requirements are here, here's a list of some of the limitations of entitled link usage. You're only allowed to put the link in one place. It cannot be put in a pop-up or interstitial. It cannot be put on your in-app purchase screen. So if you already have an in-app purchase screen, that has to only do Apple Pay. It cannot link you to this other place. It requires the link to open a new browser window rather than a web view within the app. You're not able to pass additional info like the user ID. This is probably the worst part. So if you're signed into the app and you're going to pay for the app somewhere else, you can't know on the web page that you're already signed in. You have to go to the web page, sign in again, make the payment, go back to the app and hope it went through. So as a user and as a developer, that sucks nuts. You're also only allowed to have one place in your app that has this callout in it. As they say here, note you're only able to pick one of these options. Having all three in your app would violate Apple's one place in your app requirement. They also take a commission on these external payments, which is 27%. So they're basically taking the same percent. It's 27 instead of 30. And when you add on the 1 to 3% that any payment processor, like, I don't know, Stripe would charge, you might even be paying more. On top of that, Apple has reserved the right to audit you at any point in time if you do this to make sure you're not hiding payments from them. So if Apple decides that some payments that didn't go through them are actually theirs, they can just charge you for 30% of all your income, not just Apple's. Insanity. I watch my video where I complain about this. It'll be linked in the description. I was livid. This was actually insane. So the company's all saying that they've been subjected to Apple's rules against this, specifically saying that the proposed fix is complex and burdensome. This isn't Microsoft and Meta complaining for the sake of it. This is legitimate, problematic, monopolistic bullshit that Apple is doing here. That I'm again saying as a fanboy that can defend the Magic Mouse, which keep asking, I'll do the video eventually. The port on the bottom of the Magic Mouse is significantly less user hostile than anything going on here. Apple's new restrictions are plainly designed to render alternatives to Apple's in-app purchases impractical for developers and inaccessible and unappealing to consumers, thus circumventing both the spirit and underlying goals of this injunction. Yep, Apple successfully added so many layers to their bullshit here that it makes no sense to do it. They have made it impossible to justify as an application developer using other payment processing solutions because they don't want you to. So they'll gladly check all the boxes that the government has to, but they're not going to do much from there. They don't actually want you to use these things. They just want them to exist enough that they don't get hit for it. I know Amazon's far from my favorite company. It's certainly not yours either, and they're not known for being good guys, but I think them being good emphasizes just how bad Apple is. If you don't know what an egress fee is, it's the cost of when something is accessed externally. So if I host a website on AWS and someone fetches that website, the fees for that are egress fees. If I'm trying to move my AWS stuff to another service, those are egress fees. Previously, AWS charged insane amounts of money for those types of things, especially if you're doing a full data transfer from one service to another. It would be so expensive that most companies couldn't justify it, which was kind of monopolistic. The EU cracked down on it, and not only did they follow the letter of the law, they actually went out of their way to make this more accessible, even outside of the EU. Now, if anybody actually wants to migrate their data to another cloud provider, they just hit up AWS, say, hey, I'm doing this transfer, and then they waive all of the costs for the egress for that transfer. That's huge. They're not just following the rules and checking the boxes and then going back to doing their bullshit. They're actually improving the platform because they want to compete. Whereas Apple does the absolute bare minimum to not only follow the rules, but follow the rules such that you cannot justify doing the thing the rules were supposed to unlock and enable. It's crazy to think that the ruling here was very definitive, and in the process of enabling these things, Apple's just kind of gone mad, making it impossible to justify using them. They made the alternative people are asking for worse, arbitrarily, to hold their stranglehold on the market here. This is, as far as I'm concerned, the definition of monopolistic practices, where they're using their position in one place to vertically compete in other places, preventing potential competition. Epic itself has asked the judge to enforce her original order, saying that Apple's in blatant violation of the injunction. But it's notable that other large developers like Meta and Microsoft have decided to weigh in now and show that Apple's rules can impact even the largest of tech companies. Microsoft's been trying to make game streaming a thing for a while now. They've built a massive platform around Xbox, where once you're subscribed to Xbox Game Pass, you can stream almost every game that's in the service, similar to how you'd stream Netflix or Spotify. Apple's arbitrarily decided that once something you're streaming can be interacted with, where you can like press a button and it does a thing, that counts as remote execution of software, which they've chosen to ban because they see it as a workaround to the App Store. They think that a game streaming app is an alternative app store, even though a movie streaming app isn't. And as such, they haven't just banned Microsoft from doing this, they banned the entire industry category. A huge part of why game streaming has never taken off is because Apple decided they didn't want it to. And they actually banned a whole category, a whole industry category from existing because they didn't like it. That is actual insanity. And Microsoft is rightfully pissed about this. The amici says that Apple's 12 to 27% fee on external purchases defeats the purpose of the new requirements, since it's only a few percentage points below what developers would otherwise be required to pay for in-app purchases. We're not even talking about the costs of dealing with Apple in the first place here, where like all of the bookkeeping to keep track of all these payments and reporting that to Apple and all of that, you might even need to hire a new employee to manage all that at this scale. The costs here are insane. The external purchase fee could make it unrealistic for developers to even set up an external payment system, given that other transaction costs might be incurred through the route that could eliminate any of the win that they get from that 3% change. Ugh, yeah. Plus, customers are unlikely to choose the external option if it's the same price or higher. So when you consider the fact that when you open one of these links, you get this giant pop-up of, you're about to go to an external website. Apple is not responsible for the privacy or security of the purchases made on the web. Wait, I thought Apple was charging their fee because doing all of this costs them money. If they're not going to take any of the responsibility like they do in-app, why are they still taking a percentage like they do in-app? Are you kidding? They're just contradicting themselves left and right in order to make this miserable for devs. Their only goal here, it was never to follow the law or be a good faith player. It's make the option they don't like entirely non-viable. The companies explain how Apple's in-app payments requirements impact them and allegedly harm them as well as their users. Meta, for example, says that Apple decided in 2022 to require Meta to pay the in-app purchase fee for its products that lets advertisers boost posts within the app to reach more users. This one's insane. Meta's been working hard to expand their advertising platform, so it's not just big companies boosting posts. Maybe like a small musician might pay to boost their posts about a concert to people in the area that listen to their music. Previously, if they did that through the app or through the website, it would cost Meta the same fee of whatever their payment processing was. Apple somewhat recently arbitrarily decided that in-app purchases used for this type of advertising should also be subject to their fees and should have to go through Apple Pay. So in order for Meta to continue enabling boosting of posts in the phone app, they had to build a whole new payment pipeline in order to handle Apple's in-app purchase stuff in order for this to work. So Meta had to pay more money to build a new service, to pull on engineers to rethink how this thing works, to increase the cost of it, to pay Apple a fee that makes no sense when it was already working perfectly. No one had complained about this. Nobody went to Apple and said, hey, by the way, we got screwed by Meta. We need you to act on this. Apple just decided they wanted to boost their revenue. This is insane. And it makes the whole feature more expensive. It absolutely does. And like, I'm not here to like be super pro Facebook. Like, I got enough shit for that for talking about React so much. But they were the ones in the right here for sure. When asked for comment on the amicus brief, Apple spokesperson Fred Sands pointed to the company's statement of compliance to the court, where it says clearly that it has fully complied with the injunction as of January 16th. In the filing before, Apple said that Epic has never disputed that unregulated external payment links will harm users, developers, and the iOS platform more generally. This is Apple's belief, and their claim here is that Epic did not successfully dispute this point. My counter-argument would be that basically any change that adds options causes some amount of harm. The amount here is comically insubstantial compared to the benefit of it. The benefit of these companies being able to offer better services for less money is big. The benefit of being able to use an existing credit card on your account instead of using the Apple Pay flow is meaningful. The benefit of developers not having to add a whole new pipeline for payment processing in their app because they already had one that worked, that their users are already using, is also meaningful. The benefits greatly outweigh the negatives. Apple just points that there's this one negative that we're not going to say the size of, that Epic couldn't dispute, so we win. Whew. That makes the requirements for the external payment links necessary to protect user privacy and security, maintaining the integrity of Apple's ecosystem, promoting the flow of information, avoiding user confusion, and enabling efficient review of developers' apps by the app review process. Apple will get a chance to file a response before the hearing about enforcement for the injunction on April 30th. I am very excited for this injunction, and you can bet your butts we'll be covering it here as soon as this case happens. I can't believe this is still going on, but I'm really thankful more companies are jumping on the opportunity to support Epic, and I'm not out here alone supporting my old favorite gaming brand. I think this court case is really important, and I do genuinely hope y'all understand why. I don't like the idea of a future where Apple controls what innovations can and can't occur, even though I love my MacBook, I love my Vision Pro, and I love a lot of the cool stuff Apple makes. My issue with Apple isn't when they innovate or build new things, it's when they prevent others from doing the same thing. And as long as Apple is blocking the innovation of software on their platforms, I will be staunchly against their way of handling this stuff. Until next time, peace nerds.